Pints with Pete. Scott and Tagliata came up with the name Big Wheels Keep on Turning. We're going to talk about changing out blower motors and wheels. And we're going to get started in a couple minutes. Still waiting for some more people to join up. I have 2:59 p.m. Central by my time, so we're going to start this up at 3 precisely. And if anybody doesn't catch this, well, we're going to, of course, put this onto our YouTube video, as we've done for our previous Pints with Pete spot. So about 35 seconds and counting. Please, again, the rules that we have are have your phones muted. If you have a question, just type it in on the chat bar. We'll get to those. We're going to ask for most of your questions after the presentation is finished. Remember, again, we'll make this a second point. The best question, the person who has the best question gets a 6-pack of a Missouri microbrew. So try thinking of those good questions, guys. And it's 3 o'clock straight up right now. I'm going to start the presentation. First of all, if anyone is having problems either hearing me or seeing the screen, please let me know now. So I'm going to give that count of 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, no problems out there. If you do encounter problems, please, of course, let me know. It's Friday afternoon, and now we've come to the most relaxing spot on the web. Yes, it's time for Pints with Pete, the May edition. The weather is certainly heating up, and so are the service calls. Now, a Unico system has 2 moving parts. It has an expansion valve and a motor. And our partners at Sporland do a great job. We very rarely have TXVs go bad. Therefore, almost all the surface work done on a Unico system itself is done on changing out the older blower, motor, wheel, and wheels. So this is the biggest part that we sell. So let's begin changing and replacing blowers and wheels. There are air handlers in your neighborhoods, and depending upon what market you're in, that are getting over 30 years old. And they're going to have to be changed out at some point. Of course, the contractor has to make the decision. The homeowner ultimately makes the decision. If you have a 30-year-old system that has a bad motor, you may want to upgrade to a newer system. And we have a tech note available on that. It's sort of like taking a 30-year-old furnace that's had a bad heat exchanger. I don't know how many people replace the heat exchanger as opposed to selling a new furnace. But there's some older units out there. So we're going to have a little bit of history involved with this. Because the Unico system, and again, my previous 2 webinars dealt a lot about this, is it's an evolving product. So the first motors that were out there were 3450 RPM motors. They were very fast. They were very, well, they would generate up to 3 inches of static pressure. They were very powerful motors. They weren't, however, very efficient. And so then we had to make a change when the 10-SEER standard came out in 1992. Now, just a little bit of note for you. We don't like to mention this competition, but the old Dunham-Bush Space Pack, and that is what we were a linear descendant of, they had a balanced motor assembly. Now, you couldn't just replace a motor. The motor was in a louvered compartment. Excuse me, it was, there are people out there that have changed just the motor themselves. However, we're talking about a product now that hasn't been made in about 25 years. So again, you get a 25-year-old system, you may want to upgrade that to today's system. And again, we have a tech note available on that. So again, the first systems we made the VP, and that was a vertical unit, and the HP. They were the single piece units that we made at the very beginning of Unico. They were painted white. For those of you guys that were around back then, they were painted white. They did have the motor in the airstream. And then in order to conform with the 10 SEER standards, we had to make a number of changes, and one of which was we had to use a 1750 RPM motor, and we went to the modular style. And part of the engineering behind the modular style would not allow us to put the motor in the airstream. So from about 1995 until about 2003, the motor was not in the airstream. So you had two size motors. You had a 1/2 horsepower and you had a 1 horsepower. And so you had basically two models. You had the 2436 and you had the 4260. One was a 1/2 horsepower, one was a 1 horsepower motor. So again, being in a louvered compartment, you have to let air flow around any louvered compartment. I think you probably have seen this if someone in your family has blocked off the louvers on a TV. It's not a good thing to get electronics hot. So that's been the biggest problem with motors from that time period, is people that put these in and did not have any clearance around it, and of course the motor in the attic would get extremely hot during the summer. So in 2003, we'll talk about that. That's the same time we added the rheostat control. We put the motor in the airstream, and our replacements just plummeted. Now the 1218 was always kind of an odd duck with us. At first we used a 2-speed 3rd horsepower motor, and then later we used a 3-speed 3rd horsepower motor. Very rare that we have replacements of those. We probably sell the least of that than of any other size. So taking a look here, again guys, see that louver? That's what the older systems look like. Again, common sense. You know, Unico, if you've ever been to my training class, there's two things you learn: airflow and common sense. And common sense dictates we don't block a louvered grill. So in our case, we mandate a minimum of 12 inches from the wall. So a lot of people have not paid attention to that. Or maybe to their credit, the homeowners decided to put a box next to it or something like that. So that's the big thing that you have to maintain with the units that were made from 95 to 2003. So if you're having a problem, and I have people call me up about this time of year, that it's almost an annuity that they go back to the house every year replacing the motor, particularly the motor for the 4260. And that happens to be our part number A0018-G02. And, excuse me, A00139-001. I should memorize that, because that's the biggest selling part that we have here. If you are having a problem, and again, most of these items, most of these systems are in attics, just a little trickle of cold air will solve the problem. And the easy way to do that is take the aluminum core tubing and attach it to your ductwork, either fiberglass or metal. And before you do that, though, before you clamp your pliers down, put a 50% balancing orifice on. You only need a little bit of air, maybe 12 to 15 CFM of air to take care of the problem. And so run this over to the louvered grill and then secure it. So again, that's a real good way to solve a recurring problem like that, because there are many people every year, this time of year, you can count on that motor going out, or more probably the hottest day of the year when you have the most service calls. So again, 2003 was a big change for us. We've talked about this in our last 2 pints with Pete, but just to remind you, number one, we put the motor in the airstream. Today, we sell about 1/5 the amount of replacement motors that we did before. And we also added the rheostat. So again, an easy way to tell the unit is to look at the rheostat. Also that same year, we changed the ratings. We took our 2436, we made it into our 2430. We took our larger unit, our 4260, and it became the 3642. And then we designed from the ground up, as it were, the 4860, which is the 5-ton unit. That's the one that uses the A coil. Now, a note here, a lot of times the motor gets blamed, but the real problem is the capacitor. And obviously a capacitor is a very cheap and easy item to replace as compared to a motor. Companies make capacitor testers. This happens to be one I got from a catalog called Sunwa. There are many of them out there. Usually you're looking for 10 microfarads. Few cases we use 7.5, and the older 3450s use 25 microfarads. So again, this is the motor we made before 2003. If you have to change a motor, it is a little bit of work. I'm just going to tell you that right from the start. First of all, you got to take off that louvered panel. There's 5/16 nuts holding that thing on, and then take the top of the panel off as well. Now, usually the blower is secured to the motor with an Allen wrench, or Allen key rather. Sometimes there are 2 Allen keys. A few blower motors were bolted to the motor. Now, the next thing you're going to have to do is remove these bolts. So again, close up of those mounting bolts. Guys, it is a little bit of work, especially if you add to this. It's a 95-degree day and you're up in the attic. This is a little bit of work to be done. However, the good news, the units that were made after 2003 are very easy to remove. We call this the QMR, and that stands for Quick Motor Replacement. And that involves both the EC motor and the PSC motor. So all you have to do is take your 5/16 nut driver, loosen the nuts, and then twist it to the left. Then the blower motor and wheel comes out as an assembly. So they're very, very quick to change out. However, they very rarely fail. So I guess it's a good thing and bad thing all at once. Now, we had with the 4860, that unit used a larger blower wheel than anything we'd used before. And the torque on startup would occasionally break the welded ears that were attached to the motor. Here you can see a picture of that. There's a metal ear. And these metal ears, particularly with the 4860, under the right conditions, they could break. So what we did to resolve that is we came out with what we call a belly band, and today this is used on all of our motors. So this is the new EC motor and fan. Again, the PSC motors are the same way. You can kind of tell this piece right here, if you guys can see my little arrow, that is the belly band. And that's been on there for about 9 years. So here you can see, here's the belly band for the 4860. Now again, these do have mounts on here that are rubber grommets to minimize any kind of vibration. And this is where the belly band is mounted. Again, all of our units, here's the 1218, the 2430, doesn't show it here, but the 3036 and the 3642 and the 4860, they've all got the belly bands on them. Now, one thing at Unico, this is probably true for all manufacturers, we have several different suppliers rather than be dependent upon one on the blower wheels. We get the same performance, but the one that we use today is 42 blades. Some of the older units, they had 66 blades. You had to move the belly band slightly with the 66 blade wheels. You had to put up about 3/8 of an inch. And here is a very bad picture of a 44 blade versus a 66 blade. I am sorry, that's the only picture I could find of that. So again, rare that we have problems with the motors today since they're in the airstream. Again, what I've been preaching to everybody is the EC motors. Again, the EC motors have always been in the airstream. So that's number one with it. Now, the EC motor consists of 2 parts. You have a blower, you have a motor and a controller. And you can order either separately. Now, if the item is under warranty, if you guys have an extended warranty period of 5 years that you've taken my training class, we send you out both pieces. However, sometimes it's more likely that the motor has gone bad. Sometimes the controller itself can go bad. So usually the rule of thumb is if you spin the wheel and it turns freely, if the motor turns freely, the problem is with the controller. So what you want to do, you want to take a volt ohm meter and check to see if you have the proper wiring, or proper power rather, in the wiring harness for power. And that's going to be either 120 volts or most likely 230 volts. Then on the DC, on the communication lines, you want to check for between 8 to 13 DC. So the new software we're coming out with this year that we talked about in our last Pints with Pete makes the troubleshooting much easier. There is a special tool I'm going to show you. This is available through Emerson. Emerson dealers carry this. They call this the Easy Check. So we'll go through that for troubleshooting. You don't necessarily have to have it. They're about $100 through third-party sites that I've found. So again, the new software that we have, it's a big improvement for troubleshooting wiring issues. Again, that's where most of your problems occur. Certainly has with me out in the field. There's something that's loose, and if that's the case, the system doesn't work. So you can see right here, you know, you got the USB that's faulty, or the smart control board's not powered, it's not open to open a computer port. Again, so this is your troubleshooting on your diagnostics. Again, that is to your EC motor. Now, this is the Easy Check. Again, this is not a Unico item. This is available through Emerson distributors. It'll check to see if the controller is working properly or not. And if you don't have this, there's another way to check it with the volt ohm meter. But if you have this, it makes it pretty simple. You turn the power off to the system for about 5 minutes. Check the rotation and the spin of the blower fan. And if the fan is turning freely, see if the binding on the motor, if it's bound up, you have to replace the motor. Inspect the harness for the proper voltage between terminals 4 and 5. And again, check the DC voltage on the communication wire. So this is the blow-up of that it's called an UltraCheck Easy Diagnostic Tool. You see, it has 2 alligator clamps, and then it has a 4-pin connector, and a button and an LED. And what you do with this, first of all, I know this sounds dumb, but remove the power to the unit, turn the power off. Take that 4-wire communication wire harness off, and then plug that end of the UltraCheck into there. Now the next thing is it comes with 2 alligator clips for supply. Put one to a ground and put the other one to a 24-volt power source. There's no polarity to these clips. The thing about it, this Easy Check, it's about $110, and it has a non-replaceable fuse. So don't connect to a power source over 24 volts. You're going to fry the system. So what we do with this is, you notice here we have a button that we reapply the power to the system. You press the orange button right here, orange power button. That power button should be on. That power button should be lit, and now you should start seeing the motor rotate. It may take about 5 seconds till the rotation begins, and if it's not lighting up, either you didn't connect it, and you didn't connect the Easy Check properly with the 24-volt supply, or that Easy Check unit is bad. If you press it, then the green light indicates that will indicate you're communicating. If it doesn't blink, if this green light here doesn't start to blink, you got a communication issue. So very simply, you have to replace the control part of the motor. And this is the matrix with this. If you don't have power, check to see if you have power. If it's lit and rotating, well, everything's fine. If it's not lit and the motor's running, the control is bad. If the light is blinking but the motor's not running, they're going to have to do a little bit more investigation. And if it's not lit, not rotating, you've got a couple of things to check out. So these are your power supplies. These go to your wiring. Again, we have the same motor for 120 as we do for 240. The only difference between the two is if you've taken my class, there's a little jumper wire that is the difference between a 120 and a 240. So same thing here. If you don't have the Emerson Easy Check, and again, I've talked with some longtime Emerson people that weren't even aware that that part existed, not a problem. The motor is turning freely. If the motor seems to be not a problem, take the screws off of the control and pull up on that thing, and then disconnect that 3-wire harness. You see right here there's a 3-wire motor harness. Disconnect that, check the pins, make sure the pins aren't bent. You know, it's pretty obvious when there's a short. You can pretty well see if there's a problem there. And then on the control board itself, you've got to check two things. There's an NTC thermistor that can crack under the right circumstances, and of course, I happened to hook up 240 volts one time to the 115 setup, and in which case the capacitors start to bulge. So either one of those is a bad thing to have happen. Again, use your volt ohm meter to check the phase-to-phase resistance. If you have less than 100 kW ohms resistance between any of the two terminals, the control board is shot. You're going to have to replace it. So again, that Easy Check is kind of a neat little trick. We have one here that we keep in the training room for our guys to check units that come back to see what the actual problem is. But you don't need to have that. A simple volt ohm meter will tell you the difference. Obviously, if you have a PSC motor and you see that you have voltage to the motor, the controls are on, and it's not running, well, you got a bad motor. I mean, I think everybody out there has smelt a burnt motor before. So as they say, you can take your amps, you can take your ohm meter and check to see if you have an open circuit or not with that as well. So again, having fewer and fewer problems, I just have to give you some raw numbers. We sold about over 500 of the A001390001. That's the 1 horsepower motor. Now again, we haven't made that unit in over 10 years. We, by consequence, sold under 100 of the other style of motor. So I mean, it's almost never, and we sold a whopping 10 controllers last year. So again, very, very, very solid equipment. Again, I've always told people with Unico, you've got two moving parts. As you know, the TXV sometimes gets blamed when they have an ice buildup. It's almost never the fault of the TXV. It's almost always a problem with airflow. However, later this year, we are going to have, in conjunction with Sporlan, a little test and a little presentation for you on the TXVs. So thank you for participating. Remember, guys, the person that asked the best question, and I am the sole arbiter of that, you get a 6-pack of Missouri microbrews. So let's turn this over to you guys. Again, I hope everybody heard all that. So let me go to the chat box here and turn this over to you guys. Again, it's Friday afternoon. We want to give out beer. I'm not seeing anybody typing in yet. So I think the rule is if we don't have someone answer the question, ask a question, we have to give the beer to Brian. And we don't want to do that. I'm sorry, Scott. It goes to Scott. So we definitely don't want that. Oh, very good. Okay, we got our first question in here. Did you find out a lot about motors coming back because the restrictor plate is not setting properly? Lou, that's a great question. Usually what happens with the restrictor plate is that thing would cause problems with airflow. It wouldn't cause a problem with the motor per se. It would cause a problem that we wouldn't get enough airflow, or more likely, about 30% of our contractors took the restrictor plate and threw it away, and it made the system noisy. So the restrictor plate really didn't have too much of an effect on the motor itself. It had an effect on the airflow, though. So let's see if we got any other questions out there. Lou, you didn't quite finish your thought. I thought high amp draw may, let me see if yeah, if you have high amp draw with the PSC motor, all that really indicates is how much that unit is performing. The more amps you have, the more CFM of air you have. So, no, the motor didn't burn up because of the plate. How does bleed-off air work on heat pumps? Well, we don't recommend that you use a John, I got to confess a little bit of ignorance with this. When I hear bleed-off air, I generally think about zone controls. I need to know a little bit more about the question here. So if you could expand on that a little bit. I'm not quite sure I know what you're talking about here with bleed-off air to stop the motor from overheating. Well, yeah, the motors do have thermistors in there that will prevent it. If it does get above a certain temperature, it will shut off. As they say, usually the problem is that that motor has been in a very hot environment, particularly those motors made before 2003 that they covered up the ventilation plate with. Again, that probably, as they say, we sell probably 5 of those for every one of the other styles. So, I mean, that is the biggest reason why they overheat. They're not getting enough, and it's just a little trickle of air. You know, just take a piece of 2-inch aluminum core tubing. Use aluminum core because, first of all, it's up in the attic and nobody's going to hear this thing. And just put that thing in there. Now, 15 CFM is enough to solve that problem. So, you know, I guess the average life of a motor is about 10 or 15 years anyway, so we've had a pretty good track record with these. It's about the only part of Unico that ever gets replaced, and we do have a lot of people who do that. Okay, John, isn't the air too hot with heat pumps? No. The only thing that affects us with air being hot with today's motors in the airstream is if you were to use an EC motor. Just the EC motor. The PSC motor is good to about 160 degree entering air temperature. So if you're using this with a boiler and they decide to run this with the boiler set at 180 degrees, you are going to wear out that motor ahead of its time. And what we recommend that you do in that situation is limit the air temperature, limit the temperature on your boiler to 150 degrees. We've had systems that we've simulated for 5 years of use at 150 degrees. So that's, you know, electric furnace heat, no problem. And again, with us, the electric furnace is on the discharge size. Wasn't there, no, we never did publish anything on that, Lou. That was just kind of a Unico myth or Unico mythology there. That's it's not a myth because it's true. We never did publish anything on that. Sometimes you don't like to talk too much about things that went wrong. But this is the kind of thing that we do have. All right, anybody else out there want to get a 6-pack of beer? It's last call for alcohol here at the Unico. Oh, Victor Carroll's left already. Darn it. Unico employees are not eligible to win, but in any case, I'm glad he stuck on. Guys, 150 degrees may be not enough to heat the building. John, you had a customer in your territory. It was ex-military. He wanted to keep the boiler at 180 degrees, okay? He had to have it that way. So we told him to use the PSC. So there's your answer right there. The PSC can take a lot hotter air than the EC motor. So again, for that one guy in 1,000 that wants to run it over 150 degrees, we do make a PSC motor in that case for him to use. Again, we're very confident of our EC motor. As I say, the only time that comes up is with hot water heat, and you got to get over about 160 degree water temperature going in to get that. So again, it's a rare thing that happens. But you did have one guy, and I remember the story pretty well, that he was determined. I think he was an engineer on top of being ex-military, so he wanted things to be the way he wanted them to be. Okay, let's see. We have, yep, okay. Any other questions out there, guys? Well, we got a few questions out there. Again, a lot of people I know are busy out in the field. We're recording this, so this thing will be available online. We're going to put this on a YouTube video. So again, hope we have a good summer. I think we're off to some nice weather for starting summer. We've got the I-Series. I don't think if you pay any attention more than a minute to Unico, you're not aware of the I-Series being out there. They just hit our shelves yesterday. I have photographic proof. They are in stock. So guys and gals, please start thinking about selling the I-Series as well. Thank you for coming into this month's Pints with Pete.